right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies might have inspired it. And today on the show, we are talking about Sorry Baby, starring, written, and directed by Eva Victor. And this is going to be an interesting one. We get into a lot of great stuff on this episode, and I had a few people asking me if I was going to do an episode on this one. So now that the film is finally on streaming, the episode is finally coming out, and it's coming up here in a second. Joining me to talk about Sorry Baby is Steven Bernstein, and we get into a lot of great stuff, not only about the film, but then we talk about Steven's upcoming projects and his history in Hollywood and some of the amazing projects that he has been a part of over the years. It's a really great conversation coming up here in a second. Before we get to it, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media at PiecingPod, and always check out piecingpod.com to find out what we've got going on. Got some more live shows on the way and all kinds of fun stuff. So piecingpod.com for everything you want to know about Piecing It Together. And with that said, let's get into our conversation about Sorry Baby. All right, Steven Bernstein's with us to talk Sorry Baby. How's it going, Steven?
It's going okay. And you?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to talking about this one. This is going to be an interesting movie. I think there's a lot going on here for us to unpack. I think we'll get into some interesting puzzle pieces. But before we get to it, though, it is your first time on the show. Tell my listeners a little about you and what you do.
I've been in the film industry for a very long time. I originally started in the UK, originally trained as a writer and director at the BBC. Then, through a series of happy accidents, the music video scene started. I had access to equipment from the BBC. I say access, I don't know if the BBC approved of it, but I always returned it afterwards. And we began, several of us began shooting the early music videos, going back to the days of Duran, Tears for Fears, of course, Paul McCartney and Wings, Cyndi Lauper, the Eurythmics, and so on. And it was a great way to start in the industry because not only did I have the BBC more traditional training, but then we were doing lots of radical experiments with music videos. And not saying that all the music videos we made were great, some were kind of legendary. Certainly in terms of the music industry. But really, it was more about learning a craft, both by a discipline, which was the BBC background, and an utter lack of discipline and the ability to experiment with anything and just see what would come out. There's an expression I used then, there were no mistakes, only motifs. So whatever we would do, we would claim was our intention, like David Sylvian video that I shot that was entirely out of focus and then went on to win various awards. Then everyone was shooting things out of focus. It sort of changed the form and taught us that the form has a plasticity to it. And ultimately, if you're a creative artist, you can do anything you want with the medium you're working in. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it'll fail, but the attempt is significant because it can lead you to discover things about your art that you wouldn't have thought otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the great thing about music videos is the risk wasn't so great that you couldn't take a chance.
Yeah.
And then because of what we were doing there, the commercials, did some huge commercials, worked with some big directors, legendary directors in features and in film that were working in the UK and won a lot of awards from those commercials, and those led to feature films. And then to compress a long time, because we only have a limited amount of time here, of course, I went on to shoot Like Water for Chocolate, which became the highest grossing foreign language film in the US. Shot Monster, which won the Oscar for Charlize Theron. Shot White Chicks, which seems a long way from Monster, the early films of Noah Baumbach. Got the American Society of Cinematography Award nomination. Got the Sloan Award for the film I wrote and directed called Decoding Annie Parker. Went on to do Dominion with John Malkovich, Misa Fons, and then my new film GRQ and a bunch of others. So mainly I write and direct now, and then most recently a novelist, and I've got a book called GRQ, which is doing really well in the market, just came out. So that's a summary of a lot of years of life, David.
Yeah, it's an incredible resume there. And I don't know what it says about me, but as I was looking through your credits list, when I saw Half Baked, I was like, no way.
It's like a Rorschach test.
Yeah.
When I go to speak at colleges and things, I get very few people talk about Monster. Occasionally, the professor will. A lot of enthusiasm for White Chicks among a certain demographic. And then usually at the back in some corner with sunglasses on, someone will say, "And man, you shot half baked."
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I got a half baked demographic for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I will say Monster has come up as a puzzle piece on this show many, many
Oh,
times
cool.
over the years. So very
That's good to
influential
hear.
movie. But yeah, I want to actually jump off your incredible list of
Please.
achievements there, but right into this movie because was part of the reason you picked this movie because I feel it's really beautifully shot. It's one of my favorite things about the movie. Was that kind of something that stood out to you?
Kind of, it goes to my writing and my philosophy as well, and then just very often, I ruminate on things like what's happened to uh, our art. People love to call it our industry, and that right away is where you start getting into trouble.
Mm,
But when you look at what's happened with Marvel, and you look at the big tentpole films, you look at the studios. The studio goes backwards and forwards. We had a brief hiatus about the time of Easy Rider, and then the early films of Coppola and Scorsese, where they thought, hey, we can make art films and make things, address things that are important and still make money. And then along came Jaws and films like it, and suddenly the merch became more important, or as important as the film.
yeah.
And then the attention to what we were doing altered because we're driven by money because it costs a lot of money to make films. What I loved about this movie was how small and observational it was.
Mm,
It wasn't trying to hit a home run. It wasn't using the visceral, even though it was well photographed. It wasn't necessarily about the quality of the photography. It was about the appropriateness of the photography,
mm,
but it was more about a life that we would believe has genuinely been lived, or an experience that has genuinely actually been experienced. And in that sense, it becomes more important. I think authenticity and believability is one of the most important things we can do in film. In fact, even when you look at the Marvel franchise, which I kind of just criticized, if you look at the first one, which was directed by a friend of mine, John Favreau, which is Iron Man, I think what made that film was that opening monologue by Robert Downey, where it was improvised, it was genuine, and what you saw was a vulnerable, damaged, neurotic individual who
hmm.
then evolves into the superhero that we came to know. That's what we're drawn to. We think that because of superhero films, these audiences, the adolescents ourselves, are drawn to core competencies, but we're not. We're drawn to core vulnerabilities and weaknesses because we see our humanity. So when I see the genuine or the authentic in a movie, I'm drawn to it. And what I saw in this film was something that was authentic. This woman was not entirely traumatized, though she was traumatized. She didn't have an objective view of her experience entirely, but she did have an objective view. She was deeply injured, but still ironic and funny.
Hmm.
And the film was as much about the friendships that she engendered with people around her as the horrible experience she goes through. And I thought, I believe this happened, and I believe this is about a person. And it is mysterious to me understanding her character. And when the character is mysterious, we're drawn to her. We want to know who this person is. And that's why I thought the film was so elegant and beautiful and small and simple, but to me, a real movie.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And yeah, the character is someone that you want to know more about. And I there are things about this movie I liked and things that I didn't like, and I'm kind of in the middle on it. But at the same time, that whole thing of the character and trying to figure out where this person is and where they're going because of what's happened to them. I mean, that really makes it a an interesting piece. But with that said, though, let's start getting into the puzzle pieces. What do you have for your first puzzle piece for Sorry Baby?
Lost in Translation,
Okay.
which is a film that I absolutely adore. And again, very small. When you were to, I sometimes teach or help mentor writers, and there's an obsession in Hollywood about story structure, 3 acts and turning point and inciting incident, which I think is all misguided. And you interview most filmmakers, cinematographers, they'll always say, "Oh, mainly what we are is storytellers," and I really disagree. I think we use story, but we use story to discover again that great mystery, which is character. That's what we're all interested in. When we wake up in the morning, when you and I just met, David, we're probably still trying to figure each other out, and we will over the next 45 minutes.
Hmm.
As we go through our life, we meet people in business or personal life. We meet possibly a life partner. You and I are both married, I think. Um, when we meet a person, the first thing we try to do is try to figure them out. This figuring out of others is what the great mystery, or I love the term used, puzzle pieces that we find in life. And I go to cinema in part to see other people experiencing that mystery. And in Lost in Translation, nothing happens.
Yeah,
Two
sure.
people at a hotel, they meet. What's wonderful is they don't have an affair, but they're interested in each other. And then, to go to my point, the last minute of the film, he whispers something in her ear which we can't hear,
Mhm.
which goes to really saying to the audience, you'll never fully understand what the nature of this relationship is. I'm going to keep it from you. So ruminate on it and try to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that smallness, that observationalist, and then if you don't have incidents or these big events that happen, then you have time to just observe behavior. And it's so banal. He spends minutes trying to figure out is it what wallpaper or carpet color to buy with his wife who's back in Los Angeles. And there's time where we listen to some awful, because I know you're into music, some awful band. I think they call Sausalito,
Mm.
playing in the bar on the top of the hotel. It's this world where nothing important happens, but everything that's in our life that's important does happen. And
Yeah.
that's why I thought these films, in that sense, were similar. And I wouldn't be surprised if she drew on it.
Yeah, that's a great observation there, and, even, like, talking about Sorry Baby with the, the actual incident that happens, I mean, we don't actually see it, and it's, like,
Right.
something that it's something that happened to this person. We don't exactly know. We have an idea of what happened, but, we don't get to see it, and it's a very, smart choice for this character and for this story and for what we're here to observe, and, yeah, so I think that it's a really great one there with Lost in Translation. I will, this being an A24 film, I'll stay in the A24 family for my first piece and go with Janet Planet from a couple of years ago, directed by Annie Baker, starring Julianne Nicholson. A very, can I say cringy experience? But I think they both share a lot of that, where you're seeing these characters who, for various reasons, not all their own fault, but sometimes from their own, choice making, make some of the worst possible choices that kind of lead them in these directions, and you're just kind of like, oh, please don't do this to yourself. Like, and there was a letterbox review. I should have written down the name of the person, but on Janet Planet, that when the title card came up for one of the potential love interests, which is like the worst guy in the world, the entire audience groaned. And I was like, that is just exactly Janet Planet to a T right there. And I felt that was sorry. I saw this at home on a screener, but like, I feel like there are moments in this movie that if you saw it with an audience, it would just be like, oh, come on, what are you doing? But I think they're both movies that deal with a character who is at a point in their life where they could let everything that's happened to them in the past kind of take them down a bad road. And we don't know if they're going to kind of recover, but we're kind of seeing them in the early phases of kind of maybe getting there to somewhere a little bit better.
I think that's a brilliant choice, and it goes to this idea that these characters are damaged,
Yeah.
and or at least misguided or not fully evolved. And going to my point that that's what we're interested in. We want to see people who aren't perfect, and that moment that you described is what every writer dreams of.
Mhm.
When the audience wants to reach into the screen, grab someone by the shoulders, and shake them and say, "Don't do this,"
Yeah.
and you can't because they are going down the path that they've chosen. And I think that has a huge impact on an audience, which is, hey, we know the advice we would give this person. And that means ultimately the advice we give ourselves if we're in the similar circumstance. That's a great choice. Deeply flawed people being human.
Absolutely. Well, what do you got next?
An odd one, a film that not enough people have seen, and I think is a masterpiece, Perfect Days, which is about a guy, Wim Wenders, a guy who cleans toilets, public toilets in Japan. So if you see a review or the previews, you're not thinking this is a superhero film because most superheroes don't clean toilets. But again, this going to my philosophy here that the more we reduce, the more significant the film becomes. And the trope here is so interesting because you're thinking, am I really watching a film for 90 minutes about a guy who cleans toilets? But the longer it goes on, the more we realize that this is a guy who's evolved a philosophy of life and is the opposite of our character in Sorry Baby because
Mm.
he has come to an understanding of human nature. He does know who he is. He's not any longer, if he ever was, and it's alluded to that he may have been ambitious. He's found absolute peace in the routine and nature, the habituations of his life. He's forgiving of everyone. He's found a way to navigate life's caprices and injustice and pain, and is a person who has actually found some serenity, which we all hope to find, but most of us never do.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard nothing but great things about Perfect Days, and it's a movie I have not had a chance to get to yet. But it looks amazing, and Ben Benders, of course, doing something like this later on in life is awesome because, yeah, this movie has gotten nothing but raves, and I definitely want to see it. And that idea of this character who has just kind of accepted where they are, but they understand why they're where they are, and like it feels like the kind of thing that. Maybe this character played by Eva Victor in Sorry Baby should watch this movie and maybe get a little bit of
Yeah.
insight, you know?
Well, it's her friend because I think sorry, it's also about friendship.
Yeah.
And the friend that comes back to see her, I think that is as beautiful, as traumatic as the incident is. So they play in relief against each other, and she has found some level of maturity, and is kind of trying to guide the Eve Victor character into saying there's another path here. Doesn't mean that you deny the trauma, doesn't mean that you overlook it, but you've got to get on with your life,
Hmm.
is one of the messages. I mean, the message is also about how the most horrible things in our life seem incredibly commonplace. When you speak to a lot of people about childhood trauma, they will describe the most horrible trauma and for a large part of their life thinking, yeah, that happened, but I moved on.
Yeah.
And then it's for people on the outside to say, no, 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 no. What you went through was really horrible. And we need that affirmation because we tend to normalize even the most terrible of things. I think that's one of the reasons we go to see film, oddly, is that we want to know what normal is.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
when we see in film, oh, hang on, I went through that, and that's a bad thing, then we realize that we've suffered trauma. And that's one of the beautiful things about the movie we're talking about is that we see people or see a girl go through a trauma, and she kind of tries to normalize it initially, doesn't even know quite what happened, and then over time realizes how awful it may have been. Really, very, very interesting in that sense.
That's an interesting point. And yeah, I know somebody who called this like already their favorite movie. And I'm like, I'm a little mixed on it, but like from that point of view, I get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a lot to see something like that reflected back on screen.
To
So,
be fair to you, David, I also felt that the film was flawed. It was is speaking to someone yesterday who said it's very clearly a first movie.
yeah.
So what I liked about it was the performance was, I think, breathtaking. Great actress. I love the um, odd cadence of her language.
Hmm.
Reminded me of Juno in some respect. You just thought this is an eccentric person. No, it's a real person, but it doesn't seem practiced the language. The dynamic has lots of pauses where she thinks. I love when you see actors thinking before they respond. It makes it again more genuine. But then in terms of cinematography, although nicely photographed in terms of color and light, the camera very often is just plopped down,
Hmm.
and people just act in front of it, and there's simply no use of the visual that might have been there.
Sure.
So it seemed in that sense someone just beginning to learn the craft, but the writing is so elegant and the performance so great that I think that elevates the film ultimately.
Well, speaking of Juno, I wasn't going to bring that up, but another generational thing, and not a movie, but a TV show. I was thinking of Lena Dunham's Girls.
Yeah, yeah,
Another,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, a show that like really showcases a new kind of generation and all of the messiness within that generation and those kinds of people, and where that show focused so much on millennials, this focuses on Gen Z. I would imagine that's what you would call this particular generation, and a lot of these people, for better or worse, they feel like they're not very complete, and like they really need a lot of learning and a lot of growing, and that's without the awful thing that happens to the main character. Even without that, a lot of these her friend group and everybody else around her, they all feel like people that are still learning even well into their 20s, into their 30s, and like just like trying to figure things out and don't seem to have that what maybe our generation or your generation or even the millennials to a degree had of role models and things like that to kind of help them along, and they're just kind of figuring these things out just by themselves. Just it's an interesting setting too for these young people to just kind of be out in the middle of nowhere, and like you don't really see that for that kind of age range. So there's a lot of strangeness to their upbringing and to where they've kind of found themselves here. Girls, of course, is being right in the middle of New York City. It's a kind of a different thing, but they are kind of separated from any kind of parental figures or anything like that.
I think you've just hit on the key. That's probably the best one of those we've just done in terms of the puzzle pieces. I think that's great, and I love the expression you use, which is the messiness of their lives.
Hmm.
That's exactly right. And when you contrast it with what so much writing is in Hollywood, because of the orthodoxy of the way we're all supposed to write in three acts, and we supposed to have this discipline of turning point and all the rest of it, and it's become now like a cult that you're not allowed to write in any other way. Unfortunately, that's not the way we experience life.
Mm.
So when we see a lot of films, we know where the film's going to go in the first 10 minutes. We know who the characters are and what they represent. They're archetypes. They're sometimes I think cliched, but in any case, we never sense complexity, and we can predict their behavior by how they've been presented from the very beginning of the film. And
Yeah.
I think that becomes a less interesting movie.
Hmm.
What's interesting about Girls and about this film and about so many other films that show messy characters is you don't know what they're going to do because, as you say, their life is in structured order. It is, to use your terms, this great one, messy. And I think ultimately we're more interested in observing mess than we are in something that we recognize as contrived, a perfectly formed character, even if it's a villain that
Hmm.
has a single ambition, destroy the earth, whatever it is.
Right, right.
I think that's ultimately kind of boring, I
Yeah,
think.
sure. No, absolutely. This is a bit of a tangent, but the and just like that finale was just the other night, and it was quite possibly the worst finale of a TV show ever. Girls, on the other hand, which is obviously inspired by Sex and the City, is one of the best finales. I love the finale of Girls. So I mean, it's just interesting, dichotomy there. But
Yeah, no, that finish of just like that has become legendary already. And
yeah,
my God,
wild.
and the money they had, the audience they have, the following they have, the writers that they have, what went wrong?
It's absolutely crazy. We'll be talking about it for years to come. Maybe that's what they wanted. I don't know, but let's go to another one. What do you got next?
I've got a very odd one. Long way from this movie, Days of Heaven.
Oh, okay.
Now, Days of Heaven is the film that made me take a career diversion and become a cinematographer when
Hmm,
I'd been trained as a writer.
I can imagine.
Uh, it moved me beyond all reason. I saw it on a huge screen, Leicester Square in London. It overwhelmed me and then changed my entire understanding of how film worked because it was visceral. I was moved not by the dialogue, not by the narrative, but by the images.
Hmm.
And the images made me feel things about the experiences that had nothing to do with what the characters were saying for a very simple reason. And the characters rarely speak in the movie. There's some dialogue, there's some narrative, but it's very, very thin. Instead, going back to where I began, the sense of mystery, most of the time I was left trying to figure the characters out and not understanding what they were doing. And as you said again, the messiness of people making exceptionally bad choices
Sure.
and you're powerless to enter it. Now you compound that by having these powerful, evocative, visceral images that stir feelings deep within you and you're powerless to affect the outcome of these people's lives. And I thought a million miles from this film, but in the same way, kind of identical in that we're experiencing the same thing, but just with a higher emotional tenor.
No, yeah, that's a really great one. And I'm just going to jump right on top of that because it's a good kind of segue into another piece I was thinking about. And it's funny how much Malik I've been seeing in A24 movies lately. So another one, After Sun, which is another movie that, similar to Sorry Baby, before I saw it, everybody was like, "Oh my God, this is the best movie." And then I watched it and I was like a little bit like mixed on it because it's just, I have trouble finding an entry point. as far as these characters are concerned. But that being said, though, the emotions on display, I think, between Sorry Baby and After Sun, even though they're very different stories, this being the story of a father and his daughter, and the daughter reflecting on who her dad really was at a time when they went on this trip together earlier in life. Totally different stories, but those same kind of emotions are kind of on display. And again, the messiness of people trying to figure it out. And that, again, to bring it back to Malik and your puzzle piece there, that kind of storytelling and that kind of open ended and dreamlike kind of a story. And that's something that I'm seeing so much lately in a lot of these movies by these like first time directors, the A24 or the Neon kind of thing. It seems to be coming up a lot whenever we're talking about these kinds of movies. And so I think it fits in with After Sun, it would have fit in. It fits in with this really well too.
You make and you're getting to a really fundamental point, which is what are we supposed to be doing with movies?
Hmm.
So, if movies are meant to give us solace and escape from the world, then these films aren't doing that. We maybe want films that have clearly defined endings, resolution of conflict,
Hmm.
exploration of characters.
Hmm.
Um, as a filmmaker, as a writer, as a thinker, as an artist, you've got to decide: do I want to show the world as I believe it to be, or the world as I wish it to be?
Hmm.
And if our audience wants to see the world as we all collectively wish it to be, then we're denying them this pleasure. So if you've got a film like Love Actually or some other fantastic rom-com, then we're not, these films aren't satisfying this. This film certainly wouldn't address that. But, and I'm not saying that Love Actually isn't sometimes a guilty pleasure around Christmas time, and you look at it and you go, "Ah."
Hmm.
But do we really believe that the world is simply down to loving and being loved? I would love to believe that. I'm not sure if that's the way the world, not to make a pun, actually is.
Hmm.
So, but it gives us a satisfaction. There's no shame in that. All the films that we've mentioned don't necessarily give us that satisfaction. It's more of a bittersweet quality of saying, yeah, life is like that. It's full of uncertainty and it's painful. Do people go to the cinema to see things that are uncertain and painful? So that's the great dilemma. And also, when you're saying to people, hey, please give me a few million to make my movie,
Sure.
I'm going to make a film that's going to make people feel really bad. I don't know. So I'm wondering how she got the money to make this movie, because it's not, it doesn't have big stars in it necessarily. She's moderately big, but not huge. It's not about a subject that people are going to go flocking to the cinema to see. And yet she got it made, and I think made a good, if flawed movie.
It's actually really funny that you mentioned that, not counting Girls because it was an HBO show or whatever, but the rest of these movies, did they make a collective $5 million even? You know, I doubt it, but we're
No,
happy they
that's a
exist though. So,
we do. That's it's a great point. I talk about this a lot when you're going to pitch something to investors. You've got to tell them the truth. You can't lie to investors. You're tempted to, and you want to say, "Oh, this is going to make a sorry, a lot of money." You want to say
mhm.
to investors, but then you get in a great deal of trouble when it doesn't make that money. And also, the minute someone starts to sell something, you don't trust them. So I found the most effective technique to support independent film. Because look, I'm the guy who did a black and white film about the poet Dylan Thomas drinking himself in a bar in New York. Again, not Love Actually, and not a superhero film. Certainly not
Mhm.
Iron Man. It had John Malkovich in it, which is great and a great cast. But black and white, someone drinking himself to death.
Yeah.
But what I said was, this film probably won't make money. You're probably going to lose your money, but it's going to be a really good film. And what's amazing is sometimes investors who want to do something important uh, want to be involved in the process, know that there's a risk and there's a slim chance they may make money, but they're willing to take that ride because the process is an expensive bit of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, what do you got next? I've got one more after this.
I got one more too.
All right.
If we do mine first, it would be Mike Lee's Happy Go Lucky.
Oh, great movie.
I Mike Lee was my mentor, or my guide, I should say, my spirit guide. He uses, as people probably know, lots of improvisation rather than just ordinary script. So sometimes, like in this film, Happy Go Lucky, he'll sit with an actor for a year before the film gets made, as the actor or actors live the characters they're going to play in the real world. So Eddie Marsden is one of the stars of the film, plays driving school instructor. He actually qualified as a driving school instructor and taught people how to drive. This is an actor. Sally Hawkins, who plays the lead, became what we call in the UK a supply teacher, you call a substitute teacher, and did that so that they would do this, live this life, come back, speak to Mike, who would then write a script based in part on their experiences, learning the specialized argot or language from their profession, their observations they would make, the experiences they would have, all this tangential stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the central story, but everything to do with the complexity and believability of the character.
Hmm.
So again, a small world, but then also to do with the rhythm and the precision of the language that suddenly you say, oh, this isn't film language. This is language from our lives.
Hmm.
And that's what improvisation does. And also, particularly to do with our lead actress's uh, arrhythmia, the strange delivery that she has, the pauses that she takes. You're thinking, this isn't a typical performance. I've never heard anyone quite speak like this, although the character in Juno is similar, but I recognize it not from film, but from life. And I think that has to do with the nature of the performance in both of these films, which I find very effective.
Yeah, Sally Hawkins so good in that. She was so great this year in Bring Her Back. She's just always
Yeah.
awesome to see. But yeah, the kind of movie where it's not necessarily even about what happens, just all these things that are happening are bringing a little bit more understanding of these characters and their world. And a similarly small movie, like with a lot of the other things we've talked about. Actually, my last piece is also going to be yet another small one to add to our list here. I will go with To Leslie, the movie that there was a lot of
Oof.
flack with the whole Andrea Riseborough awards campaign, but it was a solid, good character piece about a woman who kind of squandered her opportunities after winning the lottery, and this is she's more of a victim of her own choices versus what happens in Sorry Baby, but at the same time, these are people who can look at what's happened to them and choose their path forward. And again, I kind of said this earlier, but like we don't exactly know if things are going to be okay for her, but I kind of think the endings of both movies have similarities with in Sorry Baby, she's talking to the baby and she's, obviously kind of talking to herself at the same time, like really kind of coming to some understandings of what she's been through and where she's headed and how things are going to be going forward. She's kind of laying that on the baby versus To Leslie with her kind of coming to a realization that like, this is where I'm at now and I have to figure something out going forward. And if I do, maybe things will be good. And if I don't, this is where I'm at and it's not going to change. And I think there's a lot of similarities to those endings and the way that uncertainty just kind of faces the character.
And fitting into your overall observation that you could add that to the list, and we're probably still not at 5 million with all these movies.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and it didn't get the nomination. I don't think it would have done anything at all. Again, going to the subject matter, someone who's got kind of a drinking problem, got emotional problems, relationship problems, made a mess of their lives. Who would want to see this movie? But part of us do want to see these movies because we do want to learn about the nature of life. AI is a big issue out here right now and
sure.
everywhere about can AI write? My fundamental belief is that however good AI becomes at imitating me or any other writer, we're not really interested in what AI has to say or express
Yeah,
because it's not another damaged, suffering, sentient human being who's imperfect. And we want to see those people, not maybe as often as these independent films would suggest, but we do want to observe them so we can learn something about our own lives from the observation of others. AI's experience of the world isn't going to teach me much because I'm not as yet in singularity and I'm not AI, I'm a person. So I often ask people who are heavy into AI, would you marry a robot?
hmm,
Because if it can do everything that your partner theoretically does, surely that's the singularity and perfection that you're looking for. And they go, no, 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 I don't want that. Well, no, of course not, because you want the uncertainty of the experience that marriage or a long term relationship is. So I think that's why these films are interesting to observe. There's an experience. I think it's important they're out there. They're never going to be huge money makers, but that's okay. I think in balance, we need all sorts of movies to fully enrich our lives.
Absolutely, and to the AI conversation, these movies we just talked about are movies that are going to inspire people to make movies. Whereas whatever AI is going to spit out, I mean, the masses might watch it, but
Yeah.
the next movie makers are not going to be inspired by that stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
You
a
know, we do a thing out here, these test screenings where you have these facilitators and they show your film and they analyze what the audiences say afterwards. And it's very interesting. They never say, oh, the film's good or bad. They're always talking about how the audience is likely to respond to the stuff you put in front of them in terms of what will maximize box office.
mhm.
And then you're thinking, okay, is this making the film better or is this generating more income? And they freely admit, we don't care whether the film's better or worse. We only care with eyes on screen or bums on seats. And that is a little bit scary. I get it. As a filmmaker, it would be suicidal for me to say, commercially suicidal, that I don't care about box office. Of course I do, because we have to earn money. Otherwise, they won't let us make our next movie. But at the same time, if we go into the process of making the film only thinking about what will maximize the number of people that will see it, we're never going to ever make another good film ever again.
Absolutely. Well, any closing thoughts before we move on and talk a little bit about you and your current projects? Anything else you wanted to mention about Sorry Baby?
Just that I think that you mentioned that the little talk she has to the baby at the end. It's funny, name the whole film about the last minute or two of the movie because I think she's basically saying to the baby, life is a lot more difficult than you think it's going to be. You're going to have to be strong and survive these experiences. You're not ultimately defined by the experiences you have. And I think what she has to say is significant and important. I also think that you pointed out, and I observed some flaws in the movie. Let's remember, as looking at the work of artists, if it wasn't commercial, if we didn't all become obsessed because of the way films are now sold and marketed about box office. There was a time I remember when they would report on the quality of film and never talk about how much money it made the box office. That
Hmm.
wasn't news. And then gradually there was this change so that everything about films, like the stock market, was determined by its commodity value. This film underperformed this weekend. This film overperformed. This film's making money. This is how much the studio made. When you switch to that way of thinking, you move away from doing things that I think matter. And I think that as flawed as this film is, it matters, and I'm glad that it was made, and I'm glad that I saw it. No piece of art, or rarely is a piece of art, maybe some Rothko, is perfect, but it's interesting both to see what an artist attempts to do and both how they succeed and how they fail. And I would generalize that to say it's also really interesting to see how people behave and how we succeed and how we fail in my own life. I think my failures have been as interesting, if not more interesting, than my successes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point. As an artist myself, like that's what makes us grow and what makes us do interesting things. And I'm excited to see what this director does next. I mean, it's certainly a big undertaking to write, direct, star your first feature. It takes a lot, and so definitely want to see what she does next. But
I got to ask you, David, because I'm fascinated by cinematographers, painters, and musicians.
mhm.
When you're writing a piece, particularly when you're writing a piece for a film, have you ever just gone on some wild tangent that you thought was dangerous and would probably fail, and maybe it did, but it taught you something about your art?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it's because especially because I am not classically trained, so when I sit down with a film, like, I just start coming up with what I think will fit, and it's not necessarily what, maybe you should do or whatnot, and as I start figuring it out, I'm like, "Ooh, I really like where this is going," and I'm just gonna follow it and see what happens, and, for the most part, that has worked out quite well for me, so absolutely.
That's what I'm into as well. Same thing when I was a cinematographer. I would take huge risks, and sometimes it works. Same thing with performance. On the film I mentioned about Dylan Thomas, I had a scene where Reese was improvising opposite my lead actress, and I had written the scene, and then they improvised, and we rewrote the scene based on a combination of the script and the improvisation.
Mm.
And it's the best single scene I've ever directed, but it was a huge risk take and a big diversion from what the story structure was, but it worked. So I am all for taking big risks, uh, possibly having sometimes big failures, but also the potential for big success.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, hey, that's a great place to start getting into some of your work. And I noticed we'll talk about some of your film work as well, but you've got the Filmmaker and Fans podcast that you're doing, and I could tell obviously through this entire conversation, you're somebody who, as much as you love working on film, you love talking about film as well. How did that kind of come about, and is it something you're continuing to wanting to do going forward?
Yeah. As you know, podcasts are harder than people think because
Mm,
doing one is easy, doing 10 is easy. You've been doing, I think, for 8 years. We've been
yeah.
doing it for two. Every single week, coming up with some fresh material. And again, this awareness of audience. What do people want to hear? And then chasing audiences, all the things I'd say maybe we shouldn't do in film, but suddenly we'll have an episode and we've got 3 million people listen to it. And we're going, okay, what do we do in that episode that we should be doing in the future? And then trying to figure out what that is. And then also not repeating the same philosophy over and over again. I got a very clear view about what I think writing should be in film, what cinematography, what direction should be. But if I just said that every single week, I get boring in a hurry. So we try to bring on guests who stimulate us, who challenge us, and then we take alternate views. We've been focusing very much on independent filmmakers, very small independents, people just starting out, just to get a different generational perspective on filmmaking, which is useful. A guy named Vince Grimes, who used to be the creative head of Google, pretty heavyweight guy, had followed my Instagram page, liked my philosophic viewpoint and the fact that I gave lessons, observations about filmmaking for free, my giving back, but also because the more I talk, the more I learn, oddly.
Mm.
It's the way my mind works. And thought it would be cool to do a few interviews with me. We did a few, and then we had some big episodes. I think the one we did on the Bear had 3 or 4 million people listen to it. It was kind of a big audience for us. And then the thing just kind of took off. And we've got some big guests and directors and writers and more coming. So, do we want to continue it? It's hard work and it takes a lot of time. But I like the fact that we're doing something of good for people and stimulating conversation. Doesn't mean we're always right or wrong, but the fact that there's a lot of independent filmmakers and some very small communities all around the world who kind of feel alone. I think one of the functions of art is to tell people you're not alone. So if I can speak to people who are doing the same thing that I've been doing for a long time and provide some benefit, makes me feel kind of good. So we're going to keep doing that for sure.
Awesome. Very cool. And yeah, people with, your breadth of knowledge. I mean, that's exactly who we want to hear from on these kinds of shows. So absolutely. So, you know, looking again at your filmography and like Water for Chocolate and Monster, I mean, these are things that look amazing and should look amazing. And, you and your collaborators, did this incredible job. But then you look at things like White Chicks or The Water Boy, and you're like, they don't need to necessarily look amazing, but they look great. But I feel like nowadays that's something that's lost on smaller, movies that aren't necessarily about how they look. Like, what do you think is going on with, like, right now with this craft of people like not really focusing so much on cinematography right now, it feels like.
I think it goes to what I was saying before, which is this obsession in Hollywood with we're storytellers and everything's about story. And these books that are out, Save the Cat, Kill the Dog, all these other books where they say, okay, we've got a paint by numbers formula where we'll tell you how films are made. And all you got to do is create a 3 act structure, have a resolution, have an inciting incident, have a crisis, have a resolution, and simply do that in anything that you undertake, and you will be successful. Here's the news bulletin, David. 95% of films fail.
Yeah.
Fail. They don't make money.
Yeah.
The less than 5 million ratio we were talking about before. So if you were to do a scientific experiment that failed 95% of the time, would it be successful? Only in Hollywood, because it's so fear driven that all the middle management people at studios or in financial institutions, production companies don't want to take risks. And if you can say to your employer, your boss, I'm doing the same thing everybody else is doing, hiring the same people, writing the same way, focusing on story exclusively, they'll say, oh, well, that's what I would have done as well, even if the film subsequently failed.
Yeah.
So when you try to go to one of these executives and say, and we're bringing in a heavyweight cinematographer, and we're going to spend a lot of time making these images beautiful, even though it's a comedy or a rom-com, they go, are you crazy? That's not to do with story. That's not what's going to make the film successful. And
Uh,
yet, when you look at Days of Heaven, when you look at The Conversation, when you look at so many other films, Apocalypse Now, they triumph in part because of the cinematography, because it isn't just about story.
Sure.
It's also about the physical, emotional, visceral experience that only music and cinematography and production design and editing can engender. It's not just about explaining narrative, it's about an immersive experience. So even on White Chicks, I spent a lot of time lighting that in a particular way so it would best facilitate comedy. I'll have to say sometimes Keenan would call me over and say, Bernstein, what are you doing? And I go, I'm lighting Keenan. And he said, it's a comedy. I go, I know, but I'm making a better comedy. And he goes, okay, show me your funny lighting. And I would do it. And then afterwards you say, yeah, okay, fair enough. That
Yeah.
did make the scene,
Nice.
better. And the same thing on Waterboy. I mean, we spent a lot of time on Waterboy with the scenes with Adam and his mom, played by the great Kathy Bates, and we lit it really dramatically to such an emotional connection. The scene where the crowd comes to his hospital, we lit like an action film with all the torches and everything else. I think that if you engender quality, then, or if you put quality, it engenders other quality, and it makes the film better.
Yeah.
So I would like to think that I've done some really broad farcical films that were really well, photographed. And
Absolutely.
talk and you talk about other things I've gone to. As we'll get to the, I write novels now, and
Yeah.
that's it. It's the oddest transition, uh, I think, in most people's lives, to go from me talking about the visceral and the visual, and now the greatest satisfaction I've gotten from anything that I've done in the last several years is this novel that I wrote, not because of the visceral, not because of the visual, but because, to the point that we've been talking about for this last 45 minutes, David, that I could get into the details and complexity and minutia of character.
Mm.
And that was so satisfying in that after all these years of implying ideas through a composition, I can now get into the exactitude of what's going on inside the person in GRQ, which is the novel, and it's just fun.
Yeah, before we go any further, tell my listeners a little about JRQ and what it's about.
Sure. The book's called GRQ Get Rich Quick. I became fascinated, and I have to say that I did it. I invested in cryptocurrency in a big way because, hey, who didn't back then? And it was such an easy thing to do. All you do is you put some money into a crypto coin and it makes lots of money and then you become rich. Tragically, as typical of my investments, I invested just before people weren't making any money and
Mhm.
it was going down. And then I began to examine and research and speak to people who are in that space saying, why does it go up and down? And the answers from these big heavyweights in that industry, who I still know very well, was amazing to me. And they said, there is no reason.
Right.
What do you mean there's no reason? They said it just goes up and it goes down. If people like it, if people don't like it, it's like a popularity contest. A great example is Elon Musk when he appeared on Saturday Night Live. The week before he was on, Dogecoin had gone way up because he said he was into it. Then he announced that he wasn't into it, and it went down. I mean, Squid Games had a coin that came out when the pump and dump. It went up thousands of points, and then when people discovered it had nothing, no substance to it, it went down thousands of points like overnight.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is so emblematic of the life I live every day in filmmaking, where you don't know whether you're going to make money or not. And people roll the dice on ideas, hoping that there's substance. And there doesn't have to be substance. Sometimes it's just a marketing campaign.
Yeah.
And then I wrote this book about a guy who invests everything he has in trying to save his house. His house is going to be repossessed. He has no other options as to make money in a hurry. He's got like 7 hours to make money, and he meets a crypto salesman and goes, "Hey, there's a guy named Steve Bernstein. I appear in my own novel,
Nice.
who's about to announce a movie. The movie's called GRQ. I made a movie called GRQ
Mhm.
based on the book. And when this movie comes out, the crypto coin GRQ is going to go way up. You better buy it, and you'll make all the money you need to save your house." So he invests in Steve Bernstein's shtick about crypto coin, puts all his money, his family's money, his friends' money, meanwhile lying to his wife that everything is fine, and goes on this wild one-day adventure while there's this huge series of earthquakes and LA is crumbling. And I wrote it, going to what I was talking to about story before. Um, I don't believe that you should write to structure. I don't believe you should use outlines. I don't think you should plan. So I just dictated this book in 2 days and read it. It was terrible. And then I spent the next 6 months rewriting it, sent it to a literary editor who, agent who said, this is fucking, if I can say that, sorry, this is fantastic.
Oh, go for
Sorry, this is
it.
fucking fantastic. I said, really? She said, yeah, I'm going to take it to a publisher. And then within minutes, we had a publisher. The book was published in the UK and here, and is getting like all 5-star reviews. Somebody gave me 1 3-star review after like 65 stars review. I'll track them down,
Of
whoever they
course.
are.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's probably a relative of mine. I don't know. But everything else was great. And then in terms of the reviews, the best reviews I've had of anything I've done since Monster, people are loving it. And such a completely different experience than being a cinematographer on music videos, where I started. I don't understand how my life took this journey, but here I am.
That's wonderful. I love that. I've got 3 questions I wanted to ask about that. So, first of all, the movie, is it an adaptation of the book or is it the movie within the book, Cut the Life? What's going on here?
You're getting the meta, David.
Yeah,
You're getting the
yeah, yeah.
meta.
I love
It's
meta.
it's a
So, yeah.
it's a combination of both,
All right.
because the book was written first, mostly. Then came the film, and then the publisher said, who had seen the film, said, "This book is great. It would be great if there was more of the film in the book, and then some other ideas. Could you?" And it was, the book was very short, still very short, but it was very, very short then. I said, "Sure." And what I was thinking, I'll write some more, and I had like this impossible deadline. So then I incorporated some of the ideas from the film, some of the things I learned about the characters from watching the actors act, and then some other ideas I wanted to explore. So there's a book, then the film, and then the book, which is a combination of the both. So it's great.
Love it.
But yes, now in the book, there's also a reference to the film, which is the film that actually made about the book. So it's meta within meta within meta,
There you
and that's
go.
part of the fun of the ride.
There you go. So I guess question number 2, a little bit of Charlie Kaufman influence there, possibly.
Oh,
He's
huge.
my
Charlie Kaufman.
favorite. Yeah. So,
Then you and I have bonded because he's the biggest influence on me as a writer,
yeah.
particularly on adaptation, which is the idea that, again, all the lessons that people are being taught about story are wrong.
Hmm.
That's not the way you should write. You should write where your impulse and your intuition takes you. If that means altering form and experimenting with ideas, then experiment and discover something wholly new rather than something tired and overused.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds really great, really fun. Adaptation is my favorite movie, by the way. But yeah,
You and me both. Yeah.
sounds like this movie is going to be a lot of fun. So real quick, I want to kind of go back to you, kind of taking that leap into filmmaking from cinematography. Just talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. I was shooting SWAT, which was a huge action film. I was doing the action unit on that, and
Sure.
I had everything that I ever dreamt of having. I had 23 cameras. We had these things called Moscow lights, with these enormous lights on telescopic arms, 120 feet in the air. I had like 12 of them. I was lighting most of East LA for a night scene. We had a 3/4 inch model of a Learjet landing on the Second Street Bridge. We had about 18 stuntmen. We had 1,700 squibs, which are little exploding blood bags against metal plates on people's bodies, so it looked like getting shot. The side of the car was getting blown out. We had a spark gun, which was going to hit the wheel of the plane as it landed. We had smoke pouring out of the back of the airplane. I had big actors, Samuel Jackson and Colin Farrell, everything one could dream of. And I was sitting there on that night after the big wet down. You sometimes wet down all the surfaces so it kicks back light. So we'd take a big water truck and wet everything down. Just finish the wet down. Just you let it dry a little bit so it doesn't look like it's wet, but it still kicks back light.
Sure.
And it was spectacular. And it should have been a dream. And I was unimaginably depressed.
Mm,
And I realized that if this was all that I'd been aspiring to for all these years, and it was giving me so little satisfaction, not that technically it wasn't great, not that the film didn't work out, it was a huge success and people cited my action sequence, which I was flattered by and delighted by, but it wasn't providing the resonant satisfaction I wanted. And literally at that moment, I got a phone call from the first guy who gave me a job in America, named Clark Peterson. Said, "Look, we got a little film we're doing in Florida. We're in deep trouble. We're about to shut down. We've shot 2 days. The stuff's unusable. First time director, and it's about a very grim subject. Remember the idea of our $5 million rule that films don't make money. So this is about a woman serial killer on a low budget, and who was possibly going to see it. And he said the name of the actress, and a rang a vague bell. I knew she's a very pretty girl, been in a couple of movies, but no one was going to give her any Academy Awards, that's for sure, because more pretty than a great actress.
mm.
But I read the script and I thought, oh, it was a really good script. we're almost at the end of SWAT. I said, you know what? I'll go and save this film for them. So, and they offered me the money. I thought, was that my per diem or is that my pay? Because that's what I was getting within an hour on SWAT.
Right,
And they said, no,
right.
that's all we got to pay you. They put me in the world's worst hotel in Florida. I still probably have some skin lesions as a result of sleeping in that bed. And I went down and met the actress, who was exceptionally beautiful, and but actually had a great integrity of vision. The director was a young woman, but really very clear on what she wanted. We bonded, and then we shot this movie in the heat with very few resources, including one roller skating thing in a tin roofed building without air conditioning, where we were perspiring like mad. I had put light bulbs into the ceiling because we couldn't fit lights in because you'd see them. So I wanted to make it look like it was decorative. All the light bulbs were blowing up, and molten glass was falling on everybody. Somehow they stopped blowing up enough for us to get the scene. And that was Monster, which went on to win the Oscar. Now, how did it lead me to directing? Afterwards, Clark said, Steven, you talk so much about film. You love film so much. You used to be a writer. He knew that I was writing scripts all the time, writing books. I wrote a textbook about film. You should really go and do your own movie, and I'll produce you. So
Nice.
I wrote a film called Decoding Annie Parker about cancer, because cancer is big in the life of people who I loved, tragically. Wrote it with my brilliant son, who's a film editor. We gave it to Helen Hunt, who read it, and within 2 hours phoned me and said, I want in this film. And I said, we can't pay you much, Helen. She said, I want in. Rang Samantha Morton, two-time Oscar nominee. Of course, Helen won an Oscar. She said, read it in a few hours, said, I'm in. And then we put together the rest of our incredible, cast. Corey Stoll, many Aaron Paul, just a great cast. Had one of the best casting directors on the planet helping out, and we made the movie, and it made millions of dollars for charity, cancer charities. It got incredible reviews, amazingly made money for my investors. It was a great success, and then I thought, you know as satisfying as cinematography is, writing and directing, it was my first love, and I'm going back to that. And that led to Dominion with John Malkovich, which is, again, a hugely delightful experience. And then GRQ, and now the next movie coming out, I'm doing a one-man show based on all my experiences. So it's a strange combination, David. I think of myself first as a writer. Right now, I think myself first as a novelist, because
No.
GRQ is having such great success. It's given me such positive reinforcement. And when you write a novel, it seems to be more about yourself than the collective experience of filmmaking is. So
Mm.
I think the reason I'm so into the novel is because it's given me a greater sense of self satisfaction. But I'm also super proud of the film, which comes out early next year, which is GRQ, which is the same thing. And I also think that it's the summation of all these different experiences. You have to be a cinematographer to understand how the visual element or the visceral elements work in a movie. You have to be someone working for other people, the way a cinematographer does, to observe and learn from them. I worked with Jon Favreau and other great directors, Patty Jenkins, of course, and I learned my craft by Baumbach, watching other great directors direct, but right next to them. And Keenan, I learned a lot from, about the nature of comedy, about the nature of people.
Yeah.
What a privilege to be able to do that for 30 years, sit in the chair next to directors, watch their successes and their mistakes, and say, that's what I would do, that's what I won't do. And then, having also understood how cinematography works, and then knowing how performance and now how writing works, and be able to combine them all in your craft, I'm very, very lucky. Not that I haven't screwed up like the characters in the films we've talked about a lot in my life, but I'm now at a place where I'm very delighted by what I'm experiencing.
That's absolutely wonderful, and I'm really excited to see the film. Tell people where they can find you, the film when it comes out, and like everything else that you got going on.
Sure. The podcast you mentioned, Filmmaker and Fans, singular and plural, is available on all the big podcasting platforms. So you can find us everywhere. Instagram, I give little talks virtually daily, or I curate things that I think significant about filmmaking, about art and writing, on Steve Bernstein, director, writer, on Instagram, maybe 100 something, 100,000 something followers, but all I think find it of value, and I keep doing that. The book, GRQ, is of course on Amazon and all good bookstores and Waterstones in the UK and Australia and Ireland, being sold all around the world. So you can find GRQ everywhere. And the film will have a limited theatrical release early next year in the US, then go to a streaming platform thereafter. So around March is we're anticipating the film release. Oddly, the book is doing so well. We want to let the book have a run, and we're doing something else that's really unusual. The one man show that I'm doing is me talking about my life experiences, about White Chicks, about Half Baked, about the making of GRQ. So now, David, the meta within the meta within the meta
Woo.
within the meta. We show clips of the film and we talk about how I raised the money, how I got cast, how we lost cast, about how the book came to be, all while making a film about it. And then we're working with a company called Sonic, which is a blockchain company, so the crypto world. And we're doing a treasure hunt where people have to find clues about the nature of the film and the book. And they get a huge prize, this bejeweled charm bracelet that Carolyn Rodney, the designer, designed.
Hmm.
Is also my life partner and also the editor of my book and everything that I write. So a huge and important creative partner of mine. And all those things come to fruition over the next months. So the blockchain launch of this strange art treasure hunt, the one man show, the book GRQ is out already, and the film. So either it will work or fail spectacularly.
Oh, that's the best kind of thing to do, right?
I think it is, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for doing the show, Steven, and hopefully we can get you back again sometime.
I'd be delighted. It was a lot of fun, David. We've got the fact we both love the same movie adaptation goes to a lot about our shared sensibility, brother. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Sorry Baby. Thank you to Steven Bernstein for joining me on that one, and thank you to all of you for listening. If you're enjoying piecing it together, make sure you are subscribed. Wherever you listen to podcasts, it is the best thing you could do to support this show is to just click that follow button or subscribe button, whatever the button is, that makes sure that you find out about all the new episodes as they come out. That is the best thing you could do if you enjoy piecing it together. You could also drop a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, but that's a couple extra steps, and I'm not asking a whole lot out of you guys. But you could also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. Join the Facebook group Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. Don't forget about our Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. All kinds of great stuff over there at patreon.com/bydavidrosen. But again, number one, just continue to be out there listening. Speaking of which, this episode's coming out right after the end of October 2025, which was the best month we have ever had on this podcast of downloads, which I don't know exactly what to attribute any of this stuff to. I put these things out there. I guest on other podcasts. I do my live shows. I just try to get my name out there as best I can. And some months it connects. Some months it's just the same as always. Some months it dips. But this was the biggest month that we've ever had on this show. So if you're out there and you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us. If you're an old listener, thanks for still being there. And everybody, just thanks for listening. Let's close this out with a piece of music like I always do. And I think I'm going to go back to my last instrumental album, Missing Pieces, and I will go, I think for a film like Sorry Baby, you got to go something a little more like introspective, so to speak. I'll go with a track called Shadow Self. I think that's a good one to include here. So we'll go with Shadow Self from my album, Missing Pieces. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
an All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.